September 480 BCE. For a single morning, the future of Western civilization hung on 1 mile of water. Athens had already fallen, its temples burned, its people fled, its homes turned to ash.
The greatest empire on earth had won, or so everyone believed.
Across the Strait of Salamis, more than 1,000 Persian warships prepared to destroy the last Greek fleet. Facing them, just 370 ships, outnumbered nearly 3 to 1, divided by old rivalries, led by a man many of their own allies did not trust. By every rule of war the ancient world understood, this battle should never have happened, and it certainly should not have changed history. But 25 centuries later, the ideas that shaped the modern world, democracy, citizenship, free debate, government by consent, exist because on that September morning, one Athenian commander convinced the most powerful man on earth to believe a lie. This is the story of Salamis. His name was Themistocles, and 10 years before Salamis, he made one of the most consequential political arguments in the history of democracy. In 490 BCE, Greece had faced its first Persian invasion, launched by Xerxes' father Darius. At the Battle of Marathon, fought on a beach northeast of Athens, the Athenians and their allies from the small city of Plataea had stopped that invasion cold. The Persians retreated. Greece celebrated. Most Athenian politicians declared the threat finished. Themistocles was not most politicians. He looked at Marathon and saw not a final victory, but a warning. Darius would come back, or his son would, and next time they would not make the same mistakes. He began quietly, methodically, building the case for a navy. In 483 BCE, his opportunity arrived. A massive new vein of silver was discovered in the state-owned mines at Laurium, in southern Attica. The standard Athenian practice was straightforward: divide the windfall among the citizens. Every free male Athenian got his share a modest but welcome bonus. Themistocles stood before the Athenian assembly and proposed something different, something that required the citizens of Athens to voluntarily give up money that was already as good as theirs. Invested in the fleet, not a handful of ships, 100 new warships, triremes, the most advanced naval vessels of the ancient world, to be added to the fleet Athens already had. The argument he made was simple. Athens could not field an army large enough to stop Persia on land. Sparta could, but Sparta was not always reliable. The sea, however, the sea was something Athens could control, if it had the ships. The vote passed. Barely. And the men who lost that vote never forgave him. But by the morning of Salamis, 7 years later, Athens had 200 warships, the largest naval force any Greek city-state had ever put to sea, built with money that could have gone into the pockets of individual citizens, spent on a danger that most of them had not yet believed was coming. Themistocles had been right. He was almost always right, which is part of what made him so impossible to fully trust. The night before the battle, the Greek War Council gathered in a tent on the island of Salamis. The Greek War Council was not a unified command, not even a particularly friendly coalition. It was a collection of fiercely independent city-states, some of them longtime enemies, forced together by the sheer size of the Persian threat. Athens and Corinth had been commercial rivals for decades, competing for the same trade routes across the Aegean. Athens and the island city-state of Aegina had fought an actual naval war just a few years before this. The Peloponnesian city-states Corinth, Sparta's allies in the southern peninsula, had already made their own calculations about survival. Their land forces had pulled back to the Isthmus of Corinth, the narrow neck of land connecting the Peloponnese to the rest of Greece, and had begun building a defensive wall across it. Their thinking was, let Persia have northern Greece, hold the wall, protect the south. Athens had no such option. There was no Athenian territory left to protect. Themistocles rose to address the council. He did not finish his first sentence. Adeimantus, the commander of the Corinthian contingent, cut him off. He did not sit down. You're right, my city is ash. Take my vote if it comforts you. But those 180 Athenian ships out there, they're still here. Without them, you have no fleet. And without a fleet, your wall at the isthmus isn't a defensive line, it's a wall around a grave. He let that land before going further. Vote to retreat, and Athens takes those 180 ships and sails to Italy. We'll build a new city there. You'll face the largest empire on earth alone. No one doubted he meant it. Those ships were nearly half the fighting fleet. Without them, there was no battle, only surrender on Xerxes' terms. The retreat was off the table. Eurybiades, the Spartan officer nominally in command, broke the silence. If not Corinth, then where? Themistocles put his hand flat on the map. Right here, this strait. 1 mile wide at its narrowest, land on both sides. Their fleet outnumbers ours nearly 3-1. What does that change?
Gilheim Wishwer. Everything. In open water, their Phoenician squadrons would surround us and take us apart ship by ship. But cram 1,000 ships into a 1-mile channel, and their numbers stop helping them. Rear ranks push into front ranks. Captains lose their own formation. Ships that can't turn. Ram ships that are trying to. And once it comes to fighting on the decks, armored men against lightly armed sailors, that's a fight we win. That assumes Persia sails into the strait willingly. They won't wait. Something in his voice closed the conversation. He offered nothing more. When the council ended, Themistocles slipped out alone, already at work on the part of the plan he hadn't shared with anyone in that tent. He called for a servant named Sisinus, the Persian-speaking slave who tutored his children. Themistocles had treated him well over the years, perhaps knowing he might one day need someone the enemy would believe. That night had come.
Row to the Persian fleet! Tell them the alliance is breaking apart, that the Peloponnesians plan to flee before dawn, and by morning, half our ships will be gone. Tell them if Xerxes seals both ends of this strait tonight, he traps every Greek ship and ends the war in a single night.
And if they don't believe me, they will. It's exactly what Xerxes wants to hear.
Every word was a lie. The Greeks weren't fleeing. The alliance hadn't broken. Themistocles had just spent 2 hours making sure of that. But he understood something about Xerxes that Xerxes didn't fully understand about himself. A man who had burned Athens and crushed every army in his path doesn't expect a trap. He expects confirmation. Sisinus wasn't delivering news. He was confirming what the king already believed. He rode into the dark. Themistocles stood alone on the shore, listening to the water, waiting to learn whether he'd just saved Greece or handed it to Xerxes. Across the strait, at the Persian base at Phalerum, Xerxes held his own council. He was 40 years old, 6 years into ruling the largest empire on earth, an experienced commander who had marched an army of hundreds of thousands across 2 continents, largely unopposed. By any reasonable measure, he had already won. Every commander gave the same advice: attack now, while the Greeks are divided and outnumbered. One voice disagreed. Artemisia, queen of Halicarnassus, the only female commander in the fleet, commanding just 5 ships, but a reputation that outweighed commanders with 10 times her resources. Xerxes respected her more than anyone else in the room, which made her deeply unpopular with everyone else in the room.
"You've already won," she said.
Athens is ash. March your army south and let the alliance collapse on its own. Corinth and Aegina will make peace, and the Athenians will have nowhere left to go. You win without losing another ship.
She was right. Modern historians largely agree it was the better strategy.
She was simply the only person with the standing to say so. Xerxes weighed her words longer than anyone else's that night. Then a messenger arrived from across the water, a note from a Greek commander named Themistocles. The alliance was collapsing. Seal the strait now, and the war ends by morning. He read it twice.
It confirmed everything he already believed. He gave the order. More than 1,000 Persian ships moved into the darkness, sealing both ends of the strait, rowing for hours as their crews grew exhausted and their formation grew steadily more cramped. Not one of them considered, even for a moment, that it might be a lie.
Before dawn, Themistocles gathered the Greek crews along the shore, men from a dozen city-states who had spent their lives as each other's enemies, now standing together because there was nowhere else left to stand. Across the water, Persian torches were sealing the exits. There was nowhere left to go. This was exactly where he needed them. He gave no formal address. He stood on the wet sand and spoke plainly.
Everything we've done has brought us to this water. Everything we've lost has brought us here too. Athens is gone. I know it. You know it. And I'm still asking you to fight for it. So let me be honest about what I'm actually asking. Behind us are our families. Everyone we got out before the fires. They're watching us right now.
Ahead of us is the only question left. Whether Greece is still anything at all. That gets decided here. This morning. By us. Board your ships. Choose the better fate.
The shoreline came alive, men moving to their vessels, first slowly, then in a rush, the sound spreading from one end of the shore to the other. Dawn broke over the Greek mainland. The Persian fleet had been at the oars for most of the night, moving through unfamiliar water in darkness, following orders based on intelligence that turned out to be fiction. Their crews were exhausted. Their formations were already compromised by the narrow confines of the strait. The night had been spent in cold, cramped ships, waiting for a Greek evacuation that was never going to happen. Then the sun came up, and there, stretched across the full width of the Strait of Salamis, shore to shore, 2 ranks deep, were 370 Greek warships, not fleeing, not scattering, waiting. The Greek formation had been arranged with care during the hours the Persians spent rowing in circles. The Athenians, 180 ships, the largest and best-drilled contingent, held the left flank, pressed against the coast of Salamis Island. The Aeginetans, the most aggressive fighters in the alliance at close quarters, anchored the right flank. The center was packed with the remaining allied contingents, not the strongest position, but they needed only to hold. The strategic intent was clear. No room for Persian flanking maneuvers, no space to deploy their superior numbers, no way to use the speed and coordination that made the Phoenician squadron so dangerous in open water. Across the water, the Persian formation was already in trouble before the battle began. The Phoenicians, Persia's best, were crowded uncomfortably against the mainland shore on their right. The Ionian Greek contingents held the left, facing the grim situation of being ordered to fight against their own people. The remainder of the fleet was packed into the center, 3 ranks deep, each captain pressing slightly forward because nobody wanted to appear hesitant with Xerxes watching from the hill. On the slopes of Mount Aigaleo, Xerxes settled into his throne. Scribes at the ready. The entire battle spread below him like a living map. He looked down at the water. The Greeks were not fleeing. Something moved across his face. Not quite doubt, not quite recognition, and then was gone. He gave the signal. The Persian fleet advanced. The Greek line did not move. Themistocles' orders had been precise. Hold position. Let the Persians come deeper into the strait. Let the rear ranks pile up behind the front until there was nowhere for any of them to go. Make the channel work for you. The distance closed. 500 yards. 300. 100. One Greek captain, history doesn't record which ship or which man, could no longer hold still. He broke formation and drove his vessel forward, bronze ram connecting with the nearest Persian ship with a sound that carried across the water. For one suspended moment, everything stopped. Then the entire Greek line surged forward. Sitting on his throne above the water, Xerxes watched his empire's fleet crumble. He could see it all. That was the purpose of the throne, the purpose of his position on the hillside. He wanted to witness his victory from his command. Instead, he was standing and watching as everything he had carried across 2 continents began to sink. Then his attention fell on a particular ship, Artemisia's ship, Queen Halicarnassus. The woman who had told him 3 days earlier not to go into battle was being relentlessly pursued by a 3-tiered Athenian warship. Her escape route to the south was blocked by another Persian ship. She had no room to maneuver. The Athenian ship was closing in rapidly. She made the only decision she could. She turned her ship and rammed the Persian ship, blocking her escape route. She sank it. Everyone on board drowned. The Athenian captain, witnessing a ship bearing no Greek markings destroying a Persian vessel, assumed she must be a deserter or an ally he hadn't yet recognized. He ceased his pursuit. Artemisia escaped. The woman who had advised Xerxes against fighting was now destroying his own fleet to survive the battle he had forced her into. Xerxes sat on his golden throne, silently observing this for a long time. Then he uttered the only words that seemed fitting. "My men have become women, and my women have become men." By midday, the strait was almost unrecognizable. Broken wrecks lay everywhere. Ships blazed on the water. People struggled in the current. The enormous fleet of 1,000 ships huddled together, unable to fight, unable to retreat, simply disintegrating. That night, Xerxes convened his final council. His general Mardonius spoke plainly. "The loss at sea changes nothing of substance. The land army is intact. Our elite infantry has not been engaged. We have more soldiers than Greece has adult men. A naval defeat does not end this war." He was not wrong about the facts. The Persian land army, still numbering in the hundreds of thousands, still the finest infantry force in the ancient world, was wintering in Boeotia, the region north of Athens, rested and undefeated. Salamis had destroyed the fleet. The army was untouched. Xerxes approved Mardonius's request to remain with 300,000 picked soldiers and complete the conquest in the following spring. But Xerxes himself left Greece. His reason was strategic, but also revealed something about the limits of even the most powerful empire. The pontoon bridges he had built across the Hellespont, the engineering feat that had brought his army from Asia into Europe, were his army's only way home. If the Greek fleet sailed north over the winter and destroyed those bridges, the Persian land army would be stranded in Europe with no supply line and no retreat. Xerxes could not risk it. He crossed back into Asia with the bulk of his forces. Mardonius stayed behind. His orders: finish the war next year. Salamis had not ended the Persian invasion of Greece. It had fundamentally changed the nature of that invasion, transforming it from a combined land and sea campaign of overwhelming force into a purely land campaign, operating deep in hostile territory, without naval support, and with its line of supply and retreat exposed. The war would go on. Greek soil was still occupied. Persian soldiers still marched on Greek roads. But for the first time since the invasion began, since Leonidas and his Spartans had held the pass at Thermopylae and died there buying time for the rest of Greece, the balance had shifted. Greece had done something that almost no one, on either side, had believed was possible. Consider what was actually at stake in that 1-mile strait. Not simply Athens, not simply Greece. The generation that fought at Salamis had no way of knowing what would come after them. They could not have known that the city they were defending, the city that was at that moment a field of ash and rubble, would, within 50 years, produce the Parthenon, the tragedies of Sophocles and Euripides, the philosophy of Socrates, whose ideas would shape Western thought for the next 2.5 millennia. The experiments in democratic governance that, for all their flaws and contradictions, would become the conceptual foundation for every democratic republic that followed, including, eventually, this one. None of that was inevitable. None of it was guaranteed by geography or destiny. It required a city. It required that city's survival. And that city's survival, in September of 480 BCE, required 370 ships to hold a line in a 1-mile channel against the full force of the greatest empire on earth. Themistocles himself would not share in what came after. Within 10 years of Salamis, he would be ostracized, exiled from Athens by the very democratic process he had used to build the fleet. He would spend his remaining years in Persia, living as an honored guest of the son of the king he had defeated at Salamis. History is not always kind to the people who save it, but the world he helped create, the tradition of free inquiry, open debate, civic participation, and the idea that a community of citizens can make decisions together and hold their leaders accountable, that world survived. It survived because of what happened in the water. The final chapter of the Persian War would not be fought at sea. Mardonius spent the winter of 480 BCE in Boeotia, the broad agricultural plain north of Athens, resting his army and attempting to fracture the Greek alliance through diplomacy. He sent envoys to Athens, offering generous terms: rebuild your city at Persian expense, keep your autonomy, simply acknowledge Persian supremacy. Athens refused, twice. In the spring of 479 BCE, Mardonius marched south. The decisive confrontation came near the small Boeotian city of Plataea, on a flat plain, suited to the kind of large-scale infantry battle at which Persian forces excelled. The Greeks met him there, with the largest land army they had ever assembled: Spartans, Athenians, Corinthians, and allies from across the Greek world, fighting together on open ground for the last time in this war. What happened at Plataea would determine whether Salamis had been the turning point it appeared to be, or merely a temporary reprieve for a civilization that Persia would eventually consume. If Salamis shattered the empire's fleet, Plataea would answer the final question. That story comes next. The Strait of Salamis is still there. You can take a ferry across it today, from the port of Piraeus to the island of Salamis. The crossing takes about 25 minutes. The water is a deep, unremarkable blue. Ferries and cargo ships move through it daily. There is no monument on the water, no visible marker to indicate that anything of significance ever happened here. The wreckage of 300 Persian ships dissolved into silt long ago. The bones of thousands of men who could not swim rested on that bottom for centuries, before the current and the time scattered them entirely. The hill where Xerxes built his throne is covered in scrub brush now, indistinguishable from any other hillside in the Aegean. History tends to erase the physical evidence of the moments that shaped it. But consider the shape of the world that came out of that September morning. The philosophy you encounter in a college course, the structure of the Senate chamber in Washington, the principle that a government derives its authority from the consent of the governed. The idea, radical in most of human history, still contested in much of the world today, that ordinary citizens have the right to participate in the decisions that affect their lives. These are not Greek inventions that exist because Greece was geographically fortunate or militarily invincible. They exist because, in 480 BCE, a politician who understood ships better than anyone in Athens convinced his city to build a fleet, and because that fleet, in the hands of crews who had something to fight for, held a line in a mile of water on a September morning, when holding that line should not have been possible. One man, one plan, one night. One lie told to a king who was too confident to question it. 370 ships against 1,000. The world turned and kept going in a direction that made this conversation, and everything else we have inherited, possible. That is Salamis. And that is why, 25 centuries later, it still matters.